So good morning, everyone. I'm Bruno de Conti, professor here at the Institute of Economics, one of the organizers of this school, and it's my great pleasure to chair this session, the first session after the opening ceremony, which is composed by three prominent people, scholars and also policymakers. Marília Bassetti, she's a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and then Kedibone Phago. He is a professor at the Northwest University in South Africa, and then Marcos Vinícius Chiliatto, who is a former student here. We are very proud about having him where he is now. He's currently the executive director of for Brazil and 8 other countries. 8 other countries at the World Bank. It's really great for us to have him there, knowing that, well, he's there defending the voice of the Global South, which is one of the topics of this school. The topic of this roundtable is geopolitical crisis, global governance, and the BRICS. I don't need to waste your time by mentioning that we are living a very particular time with the geopolitical crisis, and then it enhances the possibilities, well, it enhances the obstacles, the problems, but also maybe the possibilities of joint actions of the Global South. So this is what will be discussed here in this roundtable for the next 2.5 hours, sorry. So I will immediately give the floor to Marcos Vinícius Chiliatto. We will do a slight change in the sequence, which was in the program. Marcos Vinícius Chiliatto will start, so the floor is yours. And this microphone, it does not amplify our voice, it's only for the sake of recording, so I'll just ask the speakers to speak loud, because the students were not listening in the beginning, okay? Thank you very much, Marcos. It's a really a big pleasure for us to have you here.
You think I can put it like this?
Yes.
Let me put here. Thank you very much, Bruno. For me, it's a real pleasure, a real honor to be here, back to my school. I think you saw the opening session. Colleagues were talking a little bit about this school, and I would like to insist on that. This is, you guys are sitting on the best school, maybe, of Brazil, or one of the best. We have colleagues from the University of Rio de Janeiro here as well. So for me, it's a real honor to be here to share with you a little bit of how we are seeing the difficult world we live on at this time. I think it's very difficult to talk about the global outlook at this time. From an academic point of view, it's very difficult to make an academic analysis. We may be in a turning point. Everyone is talking about we may be in the middle of tectonic changes, BRICS countries emerging, the US trying to reestablish its hegemonic position, how this relates to Europe. It's a very difficult moment to have a very clear academic analysis. I also want to be here to learn from you, from colleagues. How are you looking at this? It's also a very difficult moment, Bruno, to build an economic strategy for developing countries, right? Because at this, what could be a turning point, it's very difficult to position itself as a country. It doesn't matter if you're left wing, right wing, or whatever wing you are. It's a difficult moment for positioning your country in this moment, and it's also very difficult to know what is the appropriate tactics, no? As an emerging economy, how do you react to the trade wars? How do you react to tariffs? Do you put, what type of measures do you respond to that? Should you make new coalitions, build coalitions? So they're very big questions. It's very difficult to make a clear analysis of what is going on and therefore have a clear answer. And everywhere I go, I see a little bit of everyone, either in the academia or ministers or vice ministers or people in multilateral institutions. Everyone is trying to understand what is going on and then position. Nobody knows where this will take us, but everybody knows it is a very critical moment in history, not easy moment in history for multiple points of view. As you see, all global institutions are under severe stress. Either if it's a international institution working with trade, such as the WTO, or if you are a financing institution, if you are the IMF, the World Bank, the colleague was making reference to the African development, all institutions are under severe stress. Some of them were even asking if they would continue existing in the future. Some would ask if they would totally change. So institutions are also under stress. I think universities are also under stress. Some colleagues were making reference of how institutions are under stress because of funding and so on and so forth. And this stress is generated by the very country that, specifically on the global institutions or global governance institution, multilaterals, however you want to call. Especially the stress on these institutions is a stress generated by the very country that was at the core of their creation, no? Specifically. As you know, after the Second World War, the US was somehow a leader in building a lot of especially the international financial architecture that we have today. And it is the same country that is now pushing stress into these institutions. And this is not me saying, this is actually, I also should say that whatever I say here, this is not a World Bank position, it's very personal assessment, and I think this is also better so we can have a frank conversation here. And what I was saying is that, and this is, again, this is not even my assessment, it was even when Trump, you will remember that at his inauguration, his speech, he said that today the America's decline is over. So he came to power with this agenda of, as he understands, right, to end the America's decline. And therefore, with this agenda of America first, back to basics, and a very anti-China stance, these are the drivers that are probably pushing the stress on the multilateral institutions and also bilateral relations, right? What they call an America First policy and the back to basics. So therefore, the institutions shouldn't be focusing on things like climate, gender. You should go back to basics for the purpose that you were created for. So this is these are the speeches that we're listening, no? In every institutions. As it is a very difficult moment in time to make an assessment, what I did personally, and I did that, we had recently, a meeting in the NDS where we were also trying to discuss the crisis in multilateralism. So what I did, I went back to some of the authors that we were reading here in this school, and also we were reading with Conceição Tavares, Fiore in Rio. And there's a group of authors that are already, ever since the 70s, they are discussing the decline of the US. You will recall that in 71, the Bretton Woods system somehow collapsed, no? And ever since the 70s, there's a very relevant group of authors that are making this discussion, no? And one of them that I would like to recommend colleagues to go back is Charles Kindleberger. He was specifically trying to understand before this, he writes in the early 70s, and so before discussing the decline of the 70s, he go back to the 30s, where in his perspective, in between the First War and the Second World War, there was a failure of hegemony. And given the fact that there was no clear hegemon, it was a period of very high instability, and that stability was only created after the clear U.S. hegemony was established after the Second World War. No? And everybody talks about Bretton Woods, the institutions that were created, and in his perspective, he highlights the importance of a hegemon bringing stability to the world system, right? So I think this is something that Kindleberger critically assesses from the differences between the First War, Second War, and then his idea that after the 70s, the US could be in decline. No? After the Second World War, in his perspective, the US brought monetary stability, brought exchange stability, and that was a result of a hegemonic superpower in his idea. And therefore, after the 70s, we will be in a period of crisis. Similar to Kindleberger, there is also a guy that I think is quite interesting to reassess, and he writes a little bit after Kindleberger. It's Robert Keohane. And he somehow is similar to Kindleberger, but he brings a little bit an institutionalistic perspective. I don't know if I can make this exaggeration, but he argues that, okay, it's correct that if you have a clear hegemon, this brings stabilities to the system, but even without a clear hegemonic power, you could have stability if you have global institutions that allow our countries to coordinate and so forth. So he brings he adds a little bit to this idea of stability through hegemony, the perspective of institutions, not such as the World Trade Organization and so on and so forth. And then there is a group of other authors, Marxist authors, that this school read a lot, which is Immanuel Wallerstein first. I think Wallerstein has he brings the idea of the hegemonic cycles. No, he puts together the cycles of accumulations, and then brings the idea of hegemonic cycles as well. So the same way as accumulation has a cycle, hegemonies have cycles, and then he goes back to the Dutch hegemony, the British hegemony. It's a very historical assessment, and then again trying to anticipate. Okay, maybe then the US is facing its decline. Giovanni Arrighi also has this perspective of the hegemonic cycles. I think the difference of Arrighi is that he's talking about Adam Smith in Beijing, so he has more clarity. He writes later on. He has more clarity on the fact that together with the decline of the U.S. hegemony, there may be another one coming, and the emergence of China. What is the role of China in building a new cycle of accumulation, cycle of hegemony? And also Professor Fiori. I think colleagues from abroad, they don't, maybe they don't know very well. Fiori is a professor from Rio. He writes mostly in Portuguese, but he has also a critical view on these perspectives, and he tries to discuss how states are constantly accumulating power, and he's very critical on the idea that hegemony brings stability. He says that the hegemon can produce stability, but can also produce instability if the outlook is not protecting the superpower. So it's normal to have periods of order, but also disorder, and disorder produced by the hegemonic power itself. So some colleagues may say that, okay, so as soon as the US sees that the current multilateral architecture, the current bilateral relations they have is not supporting the US hegemony, they may themselves produce disorder to try to reshape their own hegemony. So these are authors that have been discussing for a long time, for more than 40, 50 years, what would be the US decline. And then there are the questions of today, going back to what I was saying in the beginning, that it's not easy to make an assessment of the period we live on from a geopolitical perspective, from a multilateral perspective, whatever you wanna say. So again, trying to be inspired by these authors, these discussions, the multiple crises the U.S. hegemony have lived for a long time. We have main questions for discussions now that I think the answers are not clear. And the first one is on the centrality of the dollar. I see many colleagues making this question. I think so far we have no reason to believe that the U.S. the U.S. dollar is declining. To be frank, I think The financial architecture around the dollar is extremely strong, not only from a trade perspective, especially on financing, all the infrastructure around financing and trade, such as building hedges, such as building insurances, the debt of US dollar market, it's extremely strong. The liquidity needed for all these transactions, it's only on dollar. But of course, there's a big discussion around that, not only made by us in the Global South, but by the Trump administration themselves, right? As I said, I'm convinced that the US dollar infrastructure is extremely strong and dominant for multiple reasons. But when they do the America First policy, they are making action trying to defend, this position. So regardless of what our answer is on the centrality of the dollar, the reality is that they are taking action to defend it, and I think this is itself relevant. Then the second question, Bruno, is on what the U.S. administration themselves talk about, the decline of the U.S. Is it a decline of the U.S.? Is it some colleagues say it's at least a relative decline, you can say, because okay, you have the BRICS relevant, you have at least China, India, you have a new group of countries, which is totally different from other crises that the U.S. faced in the 70s or during the Plaza Accord. I mean, they are not the same, and therefore you may have now a relative decline that brings a new outlook to what should be the response of countries in the Global South. And as I said, regardless of what our answer is or our assessment are to those questions, I think the reality is that the U.S. is bringing uncertainty or pushing stress to bilateral deals they have, to multilateral institutions. They themselves have great influence, and as they believe they need to defend that. So I think this is a very critical an important point for us to understand, to discuss the current geopolitical context. And then what should be the tactics, for us, if these are the case, if these questions are the case. What I'm seeing personally in Washington, and I think I can share this with colleagues, especially in the environment I am now, is that there are quite, quite stronger coalitions being built, and even new coalitions. So of course the normal coalition in these multilateral institutions of emerging countries trying to have a position together, and with this strong position of emerging countries you can negotiate better conditions either for the IMF, the World Bank. I think this has been in place for some time. But there are new coalitions emerging. The Europeans on the climate, they are talking about the coalitions of the willing. They have this more idealistic view. But it's quite interesting that since the U.S. Positions are taken not only against countries on the BRICS, because some colleagues would expect that, okay, if it is a U.S. decline that you're trying to face, they will focus on China, they'll focus on countries that are, which is not the case. You'll see that they began against Europe, Japan, so many countries are being, how can I say, are facing the challenge on having to renegotiate with the U.S. and bilateral deals that they already had. And so the normal coalition, emerging countries and developed countries trying to negotiate, this is changing, and this should change more. So it's quite common to see coalitions of Latin American countries, African countries, Asian countries, but also together with European countries, and in some topics Japan also together. So it's quite interesting to see that since the world system is under stress from multiple perspectives, trade, financing, monetary, I think this is a reality that is happening. Coalitions, new coalitions being built, but of course these new coalitions are not easy as well. Countries will have different capacities to join coalitions and expose themselves to these coalitions, right? Because countries have different levels of vulnerability in this world system. No? Countries are more or less exposed to trade relations to U.S., financial relations to U.S., military relations to U.S. And this also makes really difficult to respond and position tactics on this. No? So the capacity of Mexico, for example, on giving a stronger answer to the U.S. is totally different than countries that have better capacity to negotiate. I'm not sure if this is a little bit unclear, but this is again, this is something that we already can see. No, countries are trying to build coalitions, trying to position themselves, but also the level they can expose themselves in these new coalitions varies. And it's quite interesting that for a long time the BRICS, at the BRICS we've been demanding reforms to the traditional institutions, but at this time the BRICS countries are the ones defending them. So we've been, and André has done that a lot. For so many years, BRICS countries demanding the reforms of the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO. And at this time, these are the very ones protecting them. So it's we are in a quite defensive position, in which multilateralism is beneficial for emerging countries, of course. Otherwise, you'll have you'll be vulnerable to whoever has is the most powerful. So at this time, the countries that are very much defending the traditional order, if you will, are somehow BRICS countries, because it's a difficult moment to advance our agenda. So we have to at least try to protect them. And then my last word, I think I've said too much. I thought I was going to say 10 minutes. I speak 10 minutes, I'm getting to 20. On the importance of strengthening and keep building the new institutions, right? Because as the BRICS have been demanding the reforms on the traditional architecture, the BRICS for the last years have created new institutions, institutions that are complementary, right? So we always position the new institutions as institutions that are complementary to the traditional architecture. But at this moment, while we do defend and keep engaging in the traditional institutions, we also have to keep strengthening and building the new architecture, right? The new development bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and from those try to build new instruments for our development, which is not an anti-American position. I know some colleagues in Washington, they see it that way, but they were never meant that way. The fact that a country engages with a group of countries doesn't mean you have to disengage with others. It's a bit unfortunate that colleagues in the US, they are having this assessment currently, but this is not the case, no? Especially a country like Brazil, we have this tradition of engaging in international relations with countries in Latin America, countries in Europe, with Asia, and the fact that you engage with China doesn't mean you want to disengage with the US. So Brazil's policy keeps trying to engage strongly with the US and China, but not always is possible, because the other side not always wants to engage. And in this outlook, as I said, new coalitions are being built, regardless of what our preference is. I hear from many Europeans that the new coalitions are important because the world needs to transform the America first into America alone. This is said by Europeans. So they need to isolate extremist positions that could dismantle the architecture that is in place. And then therefore defend and reform traditional institutions and strengthen institutions. I don't know, Bruno, if I said too much, too little, but I really want to hear from colleagues their views as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcos, Vinícius. It was really fascinating bringing discussions of historical discussions from big authors of geopolitics and then landing in the current challenges we are now living, and you are living more than us because you are there in the heart of the system in Washington. So it was really, really nice. I have plenty of questions. I know the students also have, but let's have our second speaker, and then at the end we can have rounds for Q&A, okay? So let's move to Kedibone Phago, who is, as I said, professor at Northwest University in South Africa. He's also the director of the School of Government Studies there at that university, which is one of our partners in activities related to the BRICS. Julian, should we move the PPT or you do it yourself? Okay. From his computer. Great. Okay. So the floor is yours. You have 30 minutes maximum to speak. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As you can see, my topic is on the geopolitical crisis, so I will appreciate your indulgence on this important conversation. So that is my sorry, I normally suffer from the voice problems. I'll really try to get it better. So and thanks to you, Mark, that it's opening is actually very insightful. So I can only add to what he has given unto us the issues that I will be presenting this morning. So I think what we must understand in the conversation we are having, at least for now, is that China has a lot of appetite for growth, and that we are looking at a point when its GDP will be surpassing that of the US. And that is quite important. And I will show you a slide a little bit later that shows the direction that this is taking, which is very important because it helps to, engage some of the questions that are going to be arising from our conversation this morning on what should we be expecting in the question of global governance for the future, post 2030 to 2050. So we need to cast our eyes to those kind of projections. I also believe that there is currently a contestation and the consolidation of the current coalitions that are happening. So you have coalition that is the one between the FOCAC, the one between China and Africa, the one around BRICS, but you also have the coalition arrangement within Africa, and I'm sure you have a lot of this in Asia, in Europe, the planning that seeks to find something for the continent by 2063. And then of course, so Africa has the continental free trade area. So this is really expected to be a huge development on the African continent in terms of making sure that there is trade taking place within the African continent. I would really advise you to go and look at the numbers that are coming out. It is fairly new, but it is already making very serious interventions. And it is really something to look to in positioning Africa in the near future. So if these numbers are correct and that the trajectory is maintained around 2030, beyond that, when China's GDP starts to parallel the US, we will also be seeing these major shifts on the African continent. So it's a very, very hopeful picture in many. So in essence, when these coalitions happen, I think the most important is also the fact that we need to find and understand which kind of resources are going to be needed across the board, and what kind of skills for the future should we be focusing on when we do this kind of discourses, because this will help strengthen the kind of collaborations and cooperations that we want to maintain in the future. Am I twisting something? This is not talking to this. Yeah, it's always going to be difficult because I'm trying to follow my notes here so that I don't look at the back. Okay. This one? Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, colleagues. So I think the point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that we need to understand the kind of resources we are going to need for the future to strengthen the kind of relations and the ties that we want to create. And of course, the issue of the coalition of the willing, it's going to be extremely important. And I believe that these are going to be the model for the future if the questions of international relations and global governance processes are going to start to be mushrooming. So I think that is really what we want to talk to. So what we also need to consider quite a lot is that the traditional corporations, we're speaking about, we need to have reforms, we need to have different kind of approaches to global governance systems in the IMF, in the World Bank, in United Nations Security Council, and so on. But these traditional corporations, they are, and I think that's why we agree with you that they are experiencing a lot of pressure. It's also because they were not meant for agility to respond to the current global needs, but they were meant to give directions and orders. But the systems has taken a complete turn to want to contest the space, and so there will be a pressure that comes with this kind of changes on the global governance demands. So we need agility. If we have a global system that is on technology. I will talk a little bit about technology towards the end. So you can see how we communicate today. It's based on agility, on speed, but these systems were not modeled around the current needs, and that for me becomes an important consideration, because the approaches that we've been having were highly bureaucratic and very, very slow. So they lose many opportunities. But it's going to be difficult to turn them around. I also thought I need to show you the expectations around the US-China GDP growth comparisons that I have spoken about earlier, their history and their projections. So you can see that towards the 2040, there will be, somewhere in the middle of 2030, there will be some changes. So China's GDP would be overtaking the US. And probably that is why we see currently from the Americans coming with the Make America Great Again. But we don't know if this is just a Trump thing that will become a global right-wing movement, or is just a phase. And that is quite important that we need to understand, because if it's just a phase, then it would mean that the future would look different from what we are expecting now. But if this is, if it's something that is going to stay longer, so in other words, we need to understand if Trump himself has built a very strong base within the Republican Party in the US to continue the MAGA movement. And if he has, or he's investing in that, then I think the current anxiety, global anxiety on our governance architecture is going to be much, much longer. And that is quite an important consideration to have. And we also need to think what would be the role of BRICS, the Global South, what would be the role of China in that regard. So I'll give some perspectives at the end. So you see the global shifts that relate to purchasing power parity that came from the IMF as well. So trying to match the share of the GDP for the BRICS nations and the G7 countries. So in other words, the money you are using in your country, your own currency, how much if it can buy you a bottle of water or a meal in comparison to the very same amount in a G7 country. So this is quite important to understand these kinds of situations, that it seems that what we are experiencing currently in the global south or in the BRICS countries, it's actually some level of stability and even some little bit of growth in terms of what our money and our currencies do for our own food security, for example. So it is it's a little bit surprising, but I think it's a very important consideration. And for me, this is quite important because it means that there's something that our countries are doing positively to make sure that we can feed our people. If it's a question of sustainability, maybe it may be another discussion for the future. But I also want to put in this is quite, for me, extremely important, because the America's presence in the world globally, it's not only about the dollarization or the dominance of the US dollar, but it's also the question of power. And Trump has never made any statement around this. And this tells you, for me, when I analyze the geopolitical questions, and I look at this picture, it really tells me that there's something he understands around not talking too much about the military presence of the US globally. And that tells you that the US at the moment has the necessary military presence and power to actually continue to protect the dominance of the US dollar, because it is not going to be going down without a fight of their status of the hegemon. So they will not easily allow China to take over. In fact, I was recently in Beijing, and one of the conversations around this question of geopolitics was whether China would be ready to take over as the new hegemon globally. And this question came up on whether China would be able to put its military bases around the world, because currently the understanding is that it is the US military presence globally that has actually stabilized the global governance. If they pull out, then we should start seeing a lot of coup d'etat in so many different parts of the world. So this is a very important architecture that you can hardly hear, and for the reasons that I have mentioned. So you can see it's over 700 bases around the world. This is huge. And also even where they are fully in charge. So you can see there the red parts are where they are US controlled, and the blue one is where they are ally controlled. So it tells you that you cannot just fight the global hegemon with the financial systems or the economy, but you will also need the, I'm not sure within BRICS or within the various coalitions of the willings, you also need to start thinking about the military part. And you know the situation in Europe and Ukraine, how Europe is struggling to support Ukraine at the moment. They will eventually do it. Probably it will take time, 5-10 years, to consolidate Europe to do the intervention that they want to do in Ukraine, if they want to do it. But it will take a very, very long time. So it tells you that the global system militarily is very vulnerable, and at the moment, at least you have the military might of the US that can help us to stabilize. So it's a very complicated situation. It's quite easy to say we want to challenge the dominance of the US dollar, but when it comes to other factors that come to military presence, it's not going to be a very easy surrender from the US globally. So I spoke about, I wanted to also indicate the issue of technology, because the question of agility in global governance, it's anchored on the technology, how we develop our public policy globally and our regulations, how we use technology in our banking system, how we safeguard our interests. So it's going to be a much more critical conversation going forward, that if we want to understand, if we want to engage on the geopolitical questions, we must also understand that technology is going to be anchored, and the laws that surround that must be factored. And because we are in a global village, the multinationals that will be running these technology companies will need to also be taxed and pay in other countries. And how do we deal with this complex global governance issues when technology is this pervasive and knows no boundaries for anyone? So hackers can always come in, and so we do have those kind of things. And I think the arrangements, the reason I'm raising this is that the arrangements within BRICS, the Latin American platforms, we need to understand that the models must factor all those important interests if we are going to be successful. in running our global system. So I think these are critical shifts, as I'm trying to allude to the kind of questions we are dealing with in relation to global governance and technology. And so I'm saying this because in the beginning I alluded to the fact that when we look, when we cast our eyes to the future, 2030, 2040 and beyond, we need to understand the kind of global arrangements and systems that will be in place so that we are able to plan and prepare better. We will not get it right, but at least we would have a very good sense on how to train our students in our classrooms, how to engage them better, so how to prepare them for the future, for the global governance system that will be here, whether with China or whether with new coalitions. But our role is to make sure that we are as prepared as we could be. So I thought I should also show you the African digital transformation strategy for 2020 to 2030, that perhaps maybe this would serve as one of the examples on how do we think for the future of global governance systems and within the current alliances and collaborations within the geopolitical shifts that we are beginning to see. So we need to go back to the drawing board and say, what kind of skills do we have if we are going to train a student from international relations or from politics or from economics? How do we weave into the future needs so that they don't only go there with the kind of traditional training that we offer in the universities, but that we also include very important skills on digital entrepreneurship, cybersecurity, as some of the kind of skills that would be needed during that time. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Professor Phago, for this extremely interesting presentation, actually bringing to the floor, to the table, some aspects to which cannot be negligent, such as the military power. Actually, we saw recently many episodes in which the European Union and European leaders were bowing to the US in a way that cannot be explained without taking military power into consideration. So thank you very much. And now we move another technology which will be deeply discussed by Marília, right? So it's a good way of moving to Marília Bassetti, professor at the Federal University of Chiliatto. She's also a former student here in Campinas. And I forgot mentioning that she's now working at the Brazilian Development Bank as advisor for the president. That's it, right? So thank you very much, Marília, for being here with us. You have up to 30 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so let's start. Good morning, everyone. It's always a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to try to keep it like a really loud voice, as my Italian family taught me. But I can make no guarantees that it's going to last through the whole panel, okay? Maybe I'm going to lose my voice to the end. So I'm going to try to give a big picture of what I want to address here today. Oh, forgot, of course. First, Bruno knows that, Célio also knows that. It's always a great pleasure to be here, and I will always, every invitation I'm going to be here, so count me in every event that Unicamp organizes. And I agree with Marcus Vinícius when he said that Unicamp is one of the best schools. So it's always a great pleasure, and I'm sure that you're going to have a great experience here. Okay? So that being said, I want to give first a big picture of what I want to address here today. First, I want to talk a little bit about the dual climate mission of the BRICS economies and share some insights from the Brazilian case with some numbers. And then I'd like to share some thoughts on the issue of digital sovereignty and democracy. Okay? So let me say first a few words about how I see the current political and economic scenario. So I agree when Marcus Vinícius said that we are living a turning point, right? And this turning point has several dimensions. So we are seeing the profound weakening of multilateral order and all the institutional framework established at Bretton Woods after the World War II. This is accompanied by increasing geopolitical conflicts, as we all have been seeing, the weakening of democracies, a loss of trust in political systems, which I think maybe is one of the worst dimensions of this crisis, and escalating climate crisis. So that's why I must say that this systemic nature of this crisis means that they have the potential disturbing or like a irreversible cascading effect worldwide. So we must bear in mind that multilateralism is a model that is guided, that guides cooperation between 3 or more countries based on common and binding principles. So historically, we can see that it has been proven capable of reinventing itself to confront great transformations. So I think that currently we are living a main challenge, which is to rethink the logic of cooperation between actors, having in mind new common and binding principles. So that's the point, and that's why I want to stress that probably the dual mission around climate change could provide that for us. I like to stress terminology used by a professor here from Unicamp, Luis Marx, who is from the history department. He said, he used the expression survival policies. So I think this is a strong definition, and probably we have to start using strong definitions so people can realize how big is our challenge, right? And of course, we have an enormous disparity between nations, even in the BRICS bloc, when we take their capacity to undertake such survival policies. So international institutions are now facing a huge dilemma. They must address these global threats while remaining trapped in outdated dynamics. So we saw that when we saw the failed attempts to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict since 2023. We also see the stagnation of the UN Security Council. So we have several examples of how outdated the dynamics of these institutions are today. So we all know that the geopolitical conditions that allowed the construction of the Paris Agreement a decade ago have drastically changed. So let me start sharing some numbers about this dual climate mission of BRICS, and let me share also some insights from the Brazilian case, okay? So as I said, we are living probably the last decade in which structural change to our society can still significantly mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis. So this is our decisive decade for action. Again, I'm borrowing the expression from Luis Marx. His book is called o decênio decisivo, so the decisive decade. And the climate crisis imposes this dual mission upon the BRICS nation. We have to mitigate emissions by accelerating the transition to low carbon economies, and we also have to adapt to the climate crisis with strong focus, I think, also because I'm working currently at the National Development Bank, so I'm biased to think that we have to have a strong focus on infrastructure, but also considering vulnerable populations. So we also live in the age of electricity, right? So we are driven by electric mobility, cooling needs, data centers, artificial intelligence. So electrification is crucial to decarbonization and is directly linked to this digital era. So this digital era, of course, itself depends on strategic minerals and energy demand. At the same time, we have seen that the competition for strategic assets and green technologies demands coordinated responses from the BRICS nations. And I do think, and that's one of the major points that I want to do here today, that Brazil represents unique conditions to lead this transformation. We have a mostly renewable electricity grid, incomparable biodiversity, significant agro-environmental capacity, enormous potential in the bioeconomy and low carbon food production, and so on. So there's a huge discussion about if we are living an energy transition or an energy addition scenario, right? And I want to reframe this debate by using some considerations from the former minister, Isabella Teixeira. She keeps doing this point in her interviews, and I agree totally with her. We are actually discussing energy security within the context of energy addition, not a simple transition. We are adding new energy sources, not just replacing old ones. And if we take the numbers from the last report from the International Energy Agency, there has never been so much investment in renewable energy. But at the same time, investment in fossil fuels remains persistently high. So global energy investment is set to rise to $3 trillion this year in 2025. Roughly $2.2 trillion is allocated to renewable, nuclear, grid storage, low emission fuels, efficiency, and electrification. It's nearly the double that is going to oil, gas, and coal. But if we take Europe as an example, for instance, global coal investment continues to grow. This year, we're going to have a 4% increase forecast. We have seen that. And nearly all the growth from last year came from China and India to meet their domestic demand. But if we take Europe, we have seen the crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine. So probably Germany is likely now to delay its planned phase out of coal. So we are in a very difficult situation. But I must reinforce that the geography of the energy investment is really changing since the last 20 years at least. So China is now the world's largest energy investor by a wide margin. Its share of global clean energy investment has risen from a quarter a decade ago to almost a third today. And what about the Brazilian climate strategy in the face of this scenario? Brazil is responsible for 3%, only 3% of global emissions. And 75% of this 3% of global emission comes from deforestation, that means land use change, and agribusiness sector. So the cornerstone of Brazil's climate strategy must be the reduction of deforestation. There's no question about that. But we have also to include legal deforestation. That's one thing that BNDES has been doing also. And of course, reforestation. We have switched the concept of arco da destruição, right? So it's the margin of all the Amazon that has been deforested. We have the director of BNDES, Teresa Campelo. She keeps saying that we have the arco da restauração. So it's all the margin from Amazon that we have several plans to reforestation and reduce the emissions of agribusiness. So the cornerstone here is deforestation, reforestation, the reduction of emission of agribusiness, and climate adaptation. So what are the key opportunities for Brazil regarding specifically energy transition? Brazil, we must say, was one of the top 10 countries in the world for energy transition investments in 2023. Last year, we invested $37 billion in our energy transition. We ranked at the 7th largest investor globally, and we were the 2nd largest among emerging economies, behind only China. We have the potential to be the first G20 nation to achieve carbon neutrality. And we have already the cleanest electricity grid in the G20. If we take the G20 average, is 40%. We have 88% of renewable. So the challenge of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Brazil depends more on stopping deforestation, as I said, and improving land use than on transforming our already clean energy sector, right? But I want to highlight here the productive dimension of that, because the low cost of renewable energy generation allows us to produce low-cost green hydrogen. So Brazil could be a global leadership in this critical market. Green hydrogen now is the key enabler to decarbonize steel and chemical manufacturing. This creates a relevant opportunity to attract investments for green fertilizer, steel, and chemical supply chains. So Brazil also holds, we know that, substantial potential in supplying critical minerals for the global energy transition, but our current production levels of critical minerals is very below our existing reserves. We also have huge upper hand in biofuels. We are the 2nd largest producer of sugarcane ethanol. We are the 4th largest producer of biodiesel, mostly from soy. So renewable fuels already represent 21.4% of our transport matrix, compared to a global average of 4.6%. So it's more than 5 times. And last year, we had the Fuel of the Future law established by President Lula. The Fuel of the Future law is supposed to establish the national programs for green diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and biomethane, among other measures, of course. And is projected to attract 260 billion Brazilian reais in investments. So Brazil already replaced nearly 50% of its gasoline consumption with ethanol, and 14% of its diesel with biodiesel. So we have a large feedstock for all routes of these new biofuels, and we have been at BNDES exploring ways to accelerate investments in sustainable aviation fuel. We put 6 billion reais to ensure a domestic supply by 2027. So from the perspective of the 2nd dimension, right, because it's a dual climate mission, so we have the energy transition, we also have the ecological transition. We can say that Brazil is a nation of huge biodiversity, and we have this natural capital that translates into massive opportunities. So we have the potential to remove around 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide through conservation mechanisms, forest restoration, avoided deforestation, regenerative agriculture, and ocean-based carbon capture and storage. So from an industrial perspective, our industrial emissions are really concentrated in steel, cement, and chemicals. And there are promising new technological paths highlighting our advantage in the sustainable use of biomass, replacing fossil fuels in these sectors. We can use charcoal as a bioreducer to produce carbon neutral steel. We already use that. Sugarcane-based ethanol can replace naphtha and natural gas in the production of biopolymers. In fertilizers, ammonia production is typically a high emission process, and we already use organic waste from sugar and ethanol mills as feedstock to produce low carbon ammonia based on biomethane. And in cement, the industry is increasingly adopting an alternative fuels through waste co-process of the use of biomass. So I like to stress that when we take the BRICS nation as a bloc, and the case of Brazil in particular, this landscape that I'm trying to give here is one, of course, of major uncertainties. I think that Marcus Vinícius already talked a little bit about that. But I think it's also of critical opportunities to our repositioning. So that's the first point that I want to make here. The second point has to do with digital sovereignty. And I want to quote a speech from President Lula that he gave on July 31. He said, "Sovereignty is the authority of a people have over its own destiny. It's a nation's capacity to chart its own course, protect its resource, steward its territory, and defend its interests in the world. For us, sovereignty is the right to build a free, just, and solidary society." When we take this quote and try to translate to digital sovereignty, I must say that we don't have one and only accepted definition for digital, for this concept of digital sovereignty, right? But after many discussions that we have been facing, including with the Brazilian government, I'm trying here to summarize some of the main features that I think that are interesting for us to have a debate here. So digital sovereignty perhaps refers to the capacity of each nation state builds, possesses, and mobilizes to exercise authority and control over the data, the operations, the technologies, and the uses that define the digital age. That's how we have been seeing this discussion. And the main point here is to build from a comprehensive vision of digital sovereignty. So this means that it's crucial to foster the development of different layers of digital infrastructure necessary for digital sovereignty. And I must say here that artificial intelligence is only one of these layers. So this broad vision of digital sovereignty builds from the Eurostack initiative, which itself builds from the Indian Stack initiative. So when we take the Eurostack initiative, it's very interesting to know, to realize that it was launched last year by the European Parliament, and it was kind of an umbrella for this European challenge in terms of technological infrastructure. It was actually designed to build from to respond to the loss of local capacity across digital value chains. So the main goal is to reduce the European current dependence on non-European actors for providing services to its citizens, business and institutions. So they organize digital infrastructure into a system of connected layers. It's like a dynamic circular ecosystem interacting with the total of 7 critical layers. So you have critical inputs such as critical minerals, energy sources, and skilled labor. We also have semiconductor. We have networks, connected devices and IoT, cloud infrastructure, software platforms, applications and algorithms, and last, data and artificial intelligence. This was kind of course, a response to the Mario Draghi report from 2024, which addresses the main challenges that the European Union have to face the future of the European Union. So let me just share 2 major lessons from this report, right? First, decarbonization and competitiveness go hand in hand. So decarbonization is viewed as an opportunity for Europe. So we have to remind that European companies still face, so I'm losing my voice, prices 2 to 3 times higher than those in the United States. And then the natural gas prices are 4 to 5 times higher. This contrasts sharply with the Brazilian case that I made first. Of course, we have like the most clean and low cost energy matrix in the world. And second, Europe is particularly exposed in terms of security. So they want to increase security and reduce dependencies. So the European Union depends on a small numbers of suppliers for critical raw materials, especially China. So there's a huge dependence on imports of digital technology. 75 to 90% of global wafer manufacturing capacity is based in Asia. So you can have a dimension of how exposed all of us are. And I want to address here another key dimension of a country's digital sovereignty, which is data sovereignty. This presents a huge challenge to ensure data interoperability and robustness, but also a significant opportunity for Brazil, given our diversity and our national databases. So I also like to stress the importance of developing artificial intelligence based on national data. That's what Aloysio Mercadante always talks about, our national large language models, large language model based on Portuguese. But I want to make a point here. Simply having data in the country does not guarantee data sovereignty. So local storage is irrelevant if the provider is subject to foreign law like the US Cloud Act, as we have all been discussing. So to ensure real data sovereignty, data center operators must comply exclusively by Brazilian legislation, free from any external subjugation. So there's a pressing need also to boost artificial intelligence infrastructure, and that of course must be sustainable and therefore based on renewable energy. So we have to have this AI infrastructure to expand our high performance computing capacity in Brazil. So I think that digital sovereignty does not mean at all isolating a country or running away from the global ecosystem, but it's actually about creating our own ecosystem. And this is a central issue because it concerns the degree of autonomy over critical decisions. So it's not about technological isolation, okay? With all of that being said, I want to finish with some final words about digital sovereignty and democracy. We had professor from Harvard, Lawrence Lessig. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with his perspective on digital sovereignty and democracy, but you should. He's one of the best authors that I've been reading. He was invited by the Supreme Federal Court of Brazil to give a lecture, and it was recorded, so it's available on YouTube. You can try to find that. And he said something like this. He said that the goal of these AI algorithms is to disseminate the engagement business model. So this basically means that big tech companies generate more revenue through social media advertising, we all know that, based on the interaction of more users on the platform. Okay, we all know that. But these business models reinforces the reach of hateful and polarizing content. So this results in the phenomenon that he said that is brain hacking, right? In which people's attention is exploited for corporate gain. It's no coincidence, we know that the Oxford Dictionary elected the word of the year of 2024, brain rot, right? We all know that also. So AI algorithms not only present items that users like, but also change users' preferences to become more predictable, leading to user radicalization. So Lawrence Lessig calls it a byproduct of the engagement business model. It's only a byproduct, like give away democracy. It's not the main goal of big techs, of course, but it's a collateral damage, of course. So they feed the information we want for us so we can believe what we want to believe. That's the whole scheme. So the AI algorithms, they, of course, feed power social media and have a huge impact on people's perception on key issues in political races, and that's why they pose the most powerful threat to democracy today. As a matter of fact, just to give a funny perspective, I think was around the last week of April, the New York Times wrote about an interaction with the CEO from GPT, ChatGPT. Someone asked him how much ChatGPT spent when users use expressions like, please give me the right direction to the central of the city, or could you la 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 la. So when people are polite with ChatGPT, this translates into cost, of course, because you don't have to be polite with AI, right? So there's a very interesting perspective here, because last year we saw the company AI-Anthropic hiring the first well-being researcher to investigate whether AI systems deserve moral considerations or not. And we already have a growing evidence that how we treat AI is affecting how we treat ourselves. Like how we treat ChatGPT influences how I treat my wife. This is incredible. So I want to conclude here by saying that I really think that the BRICS nations have a civilizing mission. So we must dedicate ourselves to rebuild the multilateral mechanisms, that's for sure. But we have to try to find these principles and these commitments, these binding principles, to guarantee survival policies, and why not mental health for all of us. Okay? That's it.